at East Denver, aka Sporkdow, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
I'm good. I think it got really cloudy, so today feels funky compared to earlier this week. But
Mm.
happy Valentine's Day, of course.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh, I love smart contract development.
Yeah,
So here's
EVM
a bit of
compatible
gossip.
L2s. Will you be my Valentine?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, this is probably inappropriate for a stream, but when I scheduled this, I was single, so like didn't matter. It's like, haha.
Whoa! Well, are you implying that in the couple weeks since then, you wish you hadn't scheduled something so late?
Yeah, yeah. So no, I have a boo now because obviously the community cares about that.
The alpha. This is what we want to know, Emily. How was your dating life?
Yeah.
Really?
How do
I
I
mean,
convert every stream into a Love Life happy hour?
yeah,
Happy hours.
yeah. This is amazing. Yeah. It seems like something's in the air. I have also found a love interest recently, so
Oh, wow,
it's
okay.
yeah, for all you single heads. I also don't mean to imply that being in a relationship is a better situation or a goal worth shooting for. I just happen to be glad that I've found someone I have a crush on. That's all I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Oh, that's great.
So for folks that are joining the stream or are watching the VOD and don't have any context, what I'll say is that this is Smart Contract Tuesdays. And what we do on Smart Contract Tuesdays is we talk about smart contract development and we improve our Solidity skills one byte at a time. And we've been doing this for, I don't know, 2 months, something like that. If you include, like, you're probably familiar, Emily, with Patrick Collins' like monster 32-hour
Yeah.
course. He did the Pythonic Truffle version first, if I remember correctly, and then
Yeah.
later released the JavaScript hard hat version. That's the one we've been going through. I don't know Python. So I Truffle has always been something that I've looked at from afar as like, oh, if only I knew Python, I'd get to play with those toys. But I mean, c'est la vie. So I finally get to learn about it a little bit today with you. And for folks that are joining, I'm curious, can we get some GMs in the chat? I'm always curious who's joining us. Or a happy Valentine's Day, or just a thumbs down emoji if you're not happy about Valentine's Day. That's all welcome here. Everything is welcome.
Yeah, I can send a thumbs down. I don't
Yeah,
know.
just in
Yeah.
solidarity.
Yeah. Just like an unnecessary date. It's a commercial holiday.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm a romantic, so
Okay, never mind.
I'll
It's
take
it's
everyone I
awesome.
can get. No, it's not that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, I
yeah.
agree. Like capitalism's bullshit, but it's nice to go on a date. So you kind
Yeah.
of,
No. So, I mean, if anyone wants to send me NFT flowers, I'm always down.
and we'll code it so they wilt over time.
Yeah. Oh, cool. My friend actually did get NFT flowers from her boyfriend. So that's this is what happens when you join Web3. It's
She's like, it
forever.
better be on mainnet.
Yeah. It is. You can do it on
Okay, great.
OpenSea.
Yeah,
So
okay. That's awesome, actually. Okay, so before we dig into Truffle, I'm curious, Emily, how did you get where you are today? How did you end up as Emily Lynn at Truffle Suite?
yeah, okay, that's a really good question. So I kind of call myself a fake in the sense or a hack. Like I kind of fell into Web3. I don't know why I got hired, but I love it. But to kind of start from the beginning, just kind of my background. Graduated college. I started off in back end development, went into DevOps, and then kind of along the way, did a variety of things. I had a side hustle with a like probiotic beverage company. And then on my team as well, in addition to being an engineer, I picked up roles as like not product, sorry, technical project management. I could talk forever about this, but you can kind of
For the
imagine.
probiotic company. Like
No, no, no,
to do
no.
okay, I
I
was
guess
like,
like
with the
my
engineering
title
or
was
what?
like co-founder and CEO of probiotic
Did
beverage
you read
company.
4 Hour Workweek and you just really wanted to sell a beverage or what? How why did you do that?
Yeah, good okay, so basically it started off with I first got introduced to water kefir, that's what it's called. It's
Mhm.
similar to kombucha, made with, like, a sugar water solution, but it doesn't taste as vinegary. So, like, any other, like, fancy story, I guess, I had it the first time when I was backpacking in Malaysia at a street market, and
This is all
then
in the copy on the label on the side of the bottle.
yeah, yeah, and then what is it called? I got talking to the street vendor and she was so nice. She actually took us back to like her production area and it was me and my sister and we saw like how she was making it and everything. And my sister was like, "This is amazing." At the time, kombucha was really taking off. So we're like, "Oh, functional beverage market. There's a real opportunity for growth here." So my sister wanted to take it back to the States. I was like, "Girl, I just graduated college. I haven't even started my job yet. I'm not ready to." So anyways, that was kind of on the back burner.
To
I
be a
started off as
sparkling
a back
yogurt
end.
startup founder.
Yeah, yeah. So I started off a back-end engineer. I got to a
Okay.
point where I was getting tired of coding and I couldn't figure out why I was unhappy. And I was like, maybe it's just I don't want to be in tech at all. I love eating, I love food. That was kind of in my back pocket. I was like, what is it like to work in CPG, which is consumer product goods?
Okay.
So like selling in grocery stores. So then my sister and I kind of launched that on the side. I love healthcare and like having a steady income. So I didn't quit my day job as an engineer. And I was working really late nights. But yeah, it was fun. We launched in like a few grocery stores. I was about to actually quit my job as an engineer to go full time into food. But then the pandemic hit. We had a recall as well because our cans started exploding in the stores. But that's it's like, yeah. But to circle back, how this got me into Web3, like there's a connection here. I promise
Sure.
you.
Sure.
And this is why I love blockchain. I meet people from all kinds of backgrounds. Um, I took a step back. I stopped going into the kitchen, I stopped producing, and I kind of did a re-inventory of, like, what I wanted out of it. Because my thing was, like, I was unhappy in my tech job, right? And I was like, "Is this making me fulfilled?" And it really was in the beginning, but at the point where I was going to quit my job, and we had reached, like, a little bit of success, it started to feel like a solved problem. Because food industry in general is just gonna be marketing and then figuring out supply chain, and kind of want that solidified, it's relatively straightforward. And the thing I really loved about being in food was more so the ability to kind of just define the entire roadmap, figuring out like product market fit. My favorite aspect was actually demoing the drink in stores and talking to customers and like figuring out how to massage that messaging so they understood
Mm.
like what I was selling, how it was different from kombucha. Like the takeaway was actually people hate kombucha, so I never marketed it as kombucha because 'cause they'd, like, turn their nose at it. I'm like, "It doesn't taste the same. The concept
Where?
is the same." Huh?
Where
Where?
was this?
In DC. So, if you guys are familiar with, like, Union Kitchen grocery stores, they're like a set of boutique stores. I was in, like, Compass Coffee, so I don't know if anyone here is from DC. But anyways, I was there. I realized I wasn't the happiest, and I was like, "Okay, I can't." Well, also pandemic, I was like, "I can't quit my job," too. I was like, "I'm not ready to," you know, I was past 26, so I had no parents to lean on, for those of you who understand what I'm saying from the US. Uh, but to circle back, I was like, "Okay, maybe I just wanted to try something new." And so that's why I moved into DevOps at my team. I made an internal transfer. I was like, "Kubernetes is sexy, there's a lot of syllables. Maybe this will be interesting."
This is
This
my
is
chance.
wrong. I hate Kubernetes. It was like declare like YAML is like not an exciting thing. But anyways, part of that role actually was at our company we got to engineers could also part-time do technical project management. So I was responsible for figuring out like flow, working very closely with product managers as well as external teams. It was interesting because we were moving our systems onto Kubernetes, which required a lot of education and teaching kind of the rest of the company of like how they're going to interact with like their new systems under the hood, right? And so again, it was kind of like I got really excited. But once I kind of got into the flow of things again, I started to feel that sense of like, I don't know what's going on. Maybe, it's part of this is like maybe I have commitment issues, is the other thing. But it became like, okay, I have gathered some feedback of like what I liked. Like at the end of the day, I enjoyed tech. Like I missed coding when I was working in food. What I liked about food was the beginning where I was like figuring stuff out. Um, and the problem, like I think I mentioned, was like having a solved problem was not interesting to me. Um, so how did this like kind of filter me into Web3? So I'm kind of lucky. My sister actually got into blockchain in like 2016, 2017. She actually developed the first blockchain course for Udacity, if you guys know it. Um, so I was living with her for the past 2 years.
What's her
Um,
name?
Jessica Lin. So she's actually the head of DevRel at Zero X Labs. Um, yeah,
Wow.
so
Shout
we
outs to
don't really
Jessica.
look alike. The secret is all I do is actually just do everything my sister does, but
Ride her
better. I'm the
coattails.
I'm the little
But
sister.
better. You learn from the mistakes. Your learning curve's
Yeah,
faster.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Got it. She gives you the wisdom. Okay.
Yeah, she's such a great sister. She's my best friend.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, she's kind of like always been telling me like, "Oh, this is really interesting. This is and I was like, "Yeah, this is really cool." Like DeFi was that first use case and it definitely has the applications. But I think for me personally, I wasn't so like I guess into the finance world that I felt like I could really resonate with the industry at that time. So kind of when I was considering my job changes, right? And like figuring out like what did I want to do? That was kind of when NFT summer came around. And not because like I was like super bullish on like digital art, but I think the idea of just NFTs in general unlocking a whole use case for kind of the layman, right? People who aren't just around for like lending and investing and stuff like that. But now it's like, oh, my mom can like understand NFTs. Like maybe she can't understand
Yeah.
like what do you call it? Automated market makers. But like
Yeah.
that I think was like this
It
is
turns out, like, look at the cool profile picture was a better use case than 300% APY on the pool 2 on the L1. Yeah. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of part of it. I was like, this is really exciting. And I think the fact that, I got to know her, I actually got to hang out with the Xerox Labs team all the time. So I'm like in a few of their pictures and stuff like that. I think it really opened up this world of like I felt like I could make tangible impact. There is a feeling of no one really knows what they're doing. Like we all know what we're doing, but it's not that same solved problem. We're still figuring out new things that are coming up constantly. And then the second piece was like developer relations was a really interesting role for me because I think it has that aspect of I get to be technical. I'm always learning and then like there is a really like cross-functional aspect to it where I also get to interface with like customers, aka developers, talk about what they are thinking. Um, and like, I don't know, like replace the grocery store with a hackathon, right? And I'm at a booth instead of like my booth is talking to devs instead of like grannies looking for carrots or something like that. Yeah, so I just applied,
Yeah.
and
And
they
now you, because you're working with,
a consensus with
a
Truffle,
consensus
yeah.
with Truffle. So now you say, "Oh, we have Truffle," which is like the kombucha of development
Yeah,
experiences.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's kind of my journey into it. I say I'm a hack because, like, I didn't have any actual, like, native Web3 experience, but I don't know, everything, like, made sense. It falls into place. I
I
should be
gotta
more,
I don't
like,
know.
proud of my background.
Yeah, actually, I'll tease you on it. I think it's um not giving enough credit to the strong catalog of experience you've built up to say that. Cuz when I say like high school teacher started doing self-taught JavaScript, stumbled into web3 pretty fast. I'm kind of glossing over the fact that I was a high school physics teacher and I have a physics degree from Berkeley and I'd taken a little bit of computer science. And so learning JavaScript wasn't as hard as if I was starting from scratch. And so, in that same way, if you're like, I'm a hack, I ride my sister's coattails, it's like, bro, you have back end experience as an engineer. You've done DevOps. Like, what could you say that someone would have more experience than you when transitioning into Web3? Like you're checking a lot of boxes. So
Yeah.
I think credit where credit's due. You've worked really hard to get where you
Yeah.
are. It sounds like you've seen some cool stuff.
Thank
I
you,
thought
thank you.
Kubernetes would be sexy.
Yeah, I mean,
Happy Valentine's Day,
I'm a
Kubernetes.
sucker for buzzwords. That's like my
Oh
vice.
no, shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I've like synergy has entered my vocabulary and I
Synergy.
cringe all the time saying
Yeah.
it, but
How can we create synergy here? Well, um, let's let's maybe shift gears a little bit because now that we know how you got where you are, we can talk about where you are, which is if correct me if this is not an accurate, concise way of putting it, in a DevRel position, helping people understand Truffle and the suite of tools that it has as you work at Consensus.
yes, that
Great.
is what I do.
So we're talking devs, we're talking smart contracts, we're talking Truffle, which I'll set the stage. Oh, Truffle, the old one from Consensus, those dinosaurs, hard hats hot. I've seen the top 10 of DeFi protocols, 7 out of 10 are using hard hat. Truffle, get out of here. Why should I go learn Python? There's fucking Foundry now. I can go, if I wanted to do the thing that's not the main one, I could just go do the EVM compatible one. Why should I care about Truffle in 2023? I'm doing the hot take version of starting the conversation,
Cool. No, that's
apparently.
really no, I'm glad you asked that because I feel like I always include that at the end of my presentations. But to take a
Mm.
step back, like Truffle's not tied to Python. I actually work primarily in JavaScript and Solidity. I don't see that use case that often. I feel like Python is more associated with like Brownie and ApeWorks. I think
Mm.
Patrick just did something cool with Truffle that you can do.
Let's take
Um,
several steps back. What is Truffle and how is it different from these other words you used?
Right, right. So Truffle is a smart contract development framework. It provides a suite of tools to kind of help you with the process of compiling, deploying, and testing your smart contracts. I think to talk about like the hot take of like why should we use Truffle? My hot take is don't. Um,
Super
because
hot. Super hot
yeah,
take.
yeah. I mean, don't in the sense that well, okay, do and don't. So
Okay.
people conflate truffle with truffle CLI. So truffle CLI is going to be like that whole development flow. I'll be demonstrating that. And that is going to be what is directly competitive with Hard Hat and Foundry. And that's where you would choose one of the three. It's really interesting that you say, like, hard hat is new because 'cause I'm at the point where I'm talking to devs, and I'm like, "What do you think of hard hat?" And they're like, "Old school, Foundry's in." So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's very much like, think of the parallel of, like,
Yeah.
millennials and skinny jeans to Gen Zs and wide leg pants. That's kind of where hard hat and Foundry are at right now. And kind of where I sit with Truffle and kind of this whole ecosystem is number one, a lot of the things that people had switched over to Hard Hat for from Truffle have been fixed in the past year. So we've changed a lot in like 1 year. So if there's those pain points like console log, like speed, etc., that's ameliorated. But the point that I think Truffle was really able to hit home with was our external tools that are cross compatible with our other CLIs. So, one of the things I say kind of when we first started and maybe how Truffle lost mind share was we were building number one, we were the very first one. So we were figuring everything out, right? At the time, the only library that existed for JavaScript connection was like Web3.js, which has its own fractured history. So when Hard Hat came along, Ethers.js was there. That was a lot easier to integrate with, and that's just kind of what happens when you're the first one. I call it first mover disadvantage.
Hmm.
But the other piece is actually we were also building tools that I think what I call like a motorcycle for tricycle riders. So specifically, something that I think is super cool is the Truffle debugger. So what we had addressed first was actually step-by-step debugging, being able to break point, dive into functions, grab contracts from Etherscan and stuff like that. But we prioritize that over console log, right? And print statements are a beginner's first step. No one learns how to use a debugger until like they're later on and like doing like very complex protocols, right? And I think that's also kind of the stumbling block that had initiated that transition from like hard hat is an easier experience to use. And I completely agree at that time. So we recognize like number one, the debugger is so useful, especially for now we're at the point where we have like billions of dollars locked up in smart contracts at like uh deployed on mainnet. So one of the problems you might see being an actual like say you're a protocol dev at a company, right? Once you deploy a contract to mainnet, that's final. So if you run into a bug or something, like you're reliant on whatever console log statements you had already deployed. And oftentimes people remove that too because that costs gas to log, right? So then how do you figure out what's going on with your transaction? This is kind of where Truffle Debug comes in alongside Ganache. So when I say like conflation, right? So there's Truffle CLI, there's Ganache, so Truffle Ganache, which is our testing chain, where you can fork mainnet or like test nets and stuff and bring that state locally in the history of transactions as well as the contracts. So the I kind of premier use case is, for example, there's a bridge hack, right? I can grab that transaction hash and then I can fork Ganache mainnet and I can say truffle debug transaction hash against this local test chain. And it can grab that information and actually step through the contract that it fetched, if it's verified, fetched from, I think, like Etherscan and Sourceify, right? And this originally was truffle only. But I think because we're open source, like we're competing for free users, it really doesn't matter that we're like fake like against each other, right? Like this was
Right.
a real need in the ecosystem that didn't
Mm.
exist. And like we worked with Hard Hat to build in compatibility. So now if you are on like a Hard Hat project, you can use Truffle debug to debug your local contracts as well as like contracts deployed um, on like mainnet in production and stuff like that. So
Wow.
that's like one piece. I'll also demo some other features that we've really built. We're focused on kind of, you know, because we've been in the space so long, I think we have a lot of insight into more complex problems. And the end goal of where we've pivoted to is seeing Truffle as more of a toolbox that you add onto your development environment. So if you want to start with Hard Hat because your tutorial you just copied some repo online that said it, like go for it. I'm here to support the builders. Like Foundry testing is amazingly fast. I'm pretty sure like I heard through the grapevine maybe some big protocol like converted all of their Hard Hat tests into Foundry tests. Right, and if there's tools that are better for you to use it, right? Truffle is here to take what we are strong at and actually build compatibility with what people perceive as their competitors. So
Mm.
like, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. If you want to learn more about it, I'm giving a talk at Youth Denver.
When? Show yourself.
I haven't gotten the date yet, but I'm
Uh-huh.
assuming it's during ETH Denver. I'm
Uh-huh.
on the public goods track.
Sick.
So really just talking about open source tooling and kind of the need for I call it co-opetition, like cooperation and competition. I really hate the narrative of like, hey, use one or the other. Like, I hate you, you're old. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but, like, not exactly, right? Like, that's
Uh-huh.
not the best way to build, and that's not gonna create the robust developer tooling that we need to make, like, Web3 succeed. So, I hope that
Yeah.
answered your question.
It did. I have a very small question just for my own edification. You mentioned, for example, that one of Foundry's benefits as in the example of converting all your tests. Um, that only really matters when you're doing like CI/CD and having to run these tests all the time, right? Like for
Right.
our audience that skews like first time biddlers, like hacking on your first project. how fast the tests complete is not the most important aspect of the developer experience by a mile. It's
Yeah.
the logs and whether they're verbose. Or
Right.
like whether the CLI for your test coverage thing that you imported gives you like a nice little chart so you can kind of understand like, oh, I didn't test that function, like these kinds of things.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe this would be a good chance to transition into the demo you want to walk us through and like how this stuff actually looks so that folks can start to have a mental model of and I know this is Truffle
Yeah.
CLI, right? This is like the whole kit
This
and
is the
caboodle.
Truffle CLI, but I'll point out kind of the pieces that relate to, what you can integrate with your other projects if you want. I'm gonna be transparent. Hard Hat was our first step with, like, building integrations because we have the closest relationship with them, and it's the
Mhm.
kind of the easiest, so I'm don't not everything is compatible with Foundry yet, but we'll get there. Also, to be transparent, I thought we were touching something else, but that's fine. I will go over Truffle.
Wait,
Um
wait, wait, wait. What do you want to show?
Huh? Oh, I mean, it was a mix, right? I think I was told or I suggested, a, like, quick brief presentation on, like, Solidity gotchas, so basically just things that have
Way
kind
better.
of given me headaches
Way
over
better.
time,
100%.
and then, we'll touch
Yeah.
on Truffle at the end.
At your preference. The goal is education and community building. So for us to talk about anything and just normalize that it's hard to learn but cool if you stick around and like we're here to answer each other's questions, anything goes. And peek behind the curtain for those of you. Um, I basically there was a way for Emily to indicate that she was interested in joining Smart Contract Tuesdays, and I set up that flow. I did not include a part that enabled Emily to describe what she wanted to talk about at all. So I've been flying blind for a lot of these. And wanted to be
Yeah.
transparent about that because I think our space value is transparency. So
Yeah, that's
that
true.
being said, I'll stop giving you the wrong introduction and and let you explain what you would like to share with us today.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. So I'll go ahead and share my
Okay.
screen.
Bada
Um,
boom,
I
bada
hope
bing.
this works.
Oh,
Yeah, I
let's
mean,
get Mystery Science Theater. There we go.
cool. Okay, so our site. So I kind of like I mentioned, my job is just basically learning all the time. I didn't until I started working at Truffle. So that's also kind of why I'm like, it's kind of a hack. Like I wasn't a smart contract developer, but you
I
you
see.
kind of do this through you learn through building dApps, right? And my thought process was, okay, if we're prepping developers for ETH Denver's hackathon, there are some things that I ran into that I just didn't understand or really confusing. And I wanted to kind of highlight what those were in case you run into them and then solutions to get around it. So that's kind of where I'm at. So this is basically all of the headaches I've encountered in the past year. And then at the end, kind of tips and tricks from Truffle that will allow you to kind of smoothen out the developer workflow and help you build faster. So yeah, that's kind of the context of what I wanted to present on. I don't know what you guys have already learned about Solidity, so if there's some redundancy, I apologize. But kind of the first thing I encountered, when I was writing smart contracts was like this split in types of data, and how we store variables. So, specifically, if you're storing reference variables, so that's going to be like a string, an array mapping. You have to define how that's stored in memory. So there's three ways to do it. There's storage, which is data persisted on chain. To kind of talk about contract, the way you set it up, any contract variables, state variables, aka not in functions, are going to be stored in storage. This is the most expensive way of storing. If you specify something as memory, that data is not persisted. So you're going to lose it once the function ends. You can change this. And then the third piece of data, that like data storage that you might see, this is actually something that comes more in a complex contract when you're thinking about gas optimization. It's not very common in beginner contracts. You might ever actually look at this. Is it behaves very similar to memory. So data is not persisted, but the thing that you need to know about it is kind of two things. It's not modifiable, and it's specifically for function parameters. So I'll kind of get into a showing of what that means exactly. So if you look at this kind of code right here. We have memory. The basic thing is like this is how you define where it's stored. So string, memory, new string. You can notice that we're like changing the variable here. Call data test. I mean, like this is working code, but if you had actually tried to reassign example string, this would fail. And like I said, we are specifying it in the parameters because this is specific location for um, function parameter data. And so I'm going to talk about why that's actually important in the next slide. Not this slide. Whoops. So a lot of it has to do with gas optimization when you're thinking about why you would even use call data. So starting off with like storage, I think for beginners, you're pretty much going to be choosing between storage and memory. My recommendation is take a memory approach first. So like when you return things, functions should return memory type, pass in parameters as memory. If you're doing calculations or like modifying an array or something, if you don't need it to persist, do it in memory. However, there is another caveat you do need to note. Memory gets quadratically more expensive as you allocate it. What this translates to is if you're used to a language like Java, for example, there's this concept of like garbage collection. But with memory and Solidity, as you allocate new memory, it kind of just increases at the end of the pointer, right? And so that is something, again, like you might not consider in a beginner dev or beginner kind of project. But that's something you might think about when you take your hackathon project to your VC because you built like push protocol was built at a hackathon. And I think gelato as well. And so you guys could do really cool things. But the next piece, like I said, like why is call data something important when it's like almost interchangeable with memory? Is specifically, I think, two parts. It's security forward. So because it's not modifiable, like that's something you might want to consider. It avoids copying that information, which is again cheaper because it can't be modified. Again, that's like a security first kind of mindset. In general, you should just be figuring out like if you can use it, you should use it, especially in terms of like arrays stored in memory get expensive in a function parameter. So if you're not going to be modifying it at all and just like playing around with it, call data is a good way to define it. If you're going to be using 0.6.9, I don't know why we're on V point, like Solidity's on 8.19 now. There's like things surrounding it, but that's just to note. But yeah, to dive back into storage versus memory, basically, one thing I wanted to note that's interesting about storage versus memory that you might run into is new storage cannot be created. So I have like two examples right here. There's a compilation failure. So essentially, um, I didn't put this in the screenshot. String test was storage variable that I had identified as a state variable in the contract. So I'm creating this new string, but really it's pointing to wherever string test is existing, right? But on the flip side, right here for the failure, this is a compilation error. Basically, I'm trying to create this new storage, new string, and allocate it to new string, which is just like a raw like memory string. But this fails because again, we can't create new storage. So something to keep in mind if you run into that. That's something that also kind of hit me on the head. So yeah, that's CETA, things that bothered me when I was first starting. This is probably one of the things I hate the most in Solidity is strings. So problems you might encounter with strings, they're stored as dynamic arrays. So that means like an array that can change size, and they're byte arrays. Specifically, that means when you're doing string comparisons, you can't do stuff like equals equals that you might be used to with like comparing ints, for example. So the workaround is actually you have to compare it as hashes. Um, and so the way you do a hash would just basically be like this is like Solidity speak for doing the hash, and that's how you compare it. One gas optimization here is basically comparing the length of the strings before you actually do the hashing. But again, this is like another thing that's really annoying about strings. So strings, a string length. So like I said, there's no length function for the string. How do you get it? We have to convert it into a bytes array. But if okay, so I forget what the order is. Something is encoded in UTF-8, which means a special character will take 2 bytes instead of 1 byte. So, for example, a string that you might expect to be like 5 characters, which has a special character in it, will actually be 6 characters. So this bytes.length will represent 6 instead of 5. Um, Also, I don't know if you'd run into something like this in like your hackathon project, but if you're like, why is my length incorrect? That could be one of the reasons why, which really sucks. And then the other piece about string conversion, or concatenating strings. So
Mm.
one example that I was running into was when I was trying to produce an error message. And I wanted to say like, oh, the error message, like this address is messed up because of like this integer number did X or whatever. How do you convert it? It's also super complicated. So what I really recommend is using um, Open Zeppelin has a bunch of utility contracts that are really nice. So this is strings library. You would just import it or npm install it. But as you can see, I'm not going to explain this code, but just imagine like this is what they're doing to convert an integer into a string. And that's like, why is Solidity like this? Like, it's the same thing, like,
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, Open Zeppelin is there for you, that do use it in your process for hackathons. Okay, um
I mean, yeah, just a brief aside, because we're doing Solidity gotchas, right? So your takeaway from this can either be, okay, good, I'll learn more Solidity, or it can be, I heard some of the other, like first mover disadvantage, right? I've heard
yeah.
some of these other languages compile down to EVM bytecode. Maybe I don't need to learn Solidity even if I'm an EVM developer, right?
Yeah.
Like Sway, for example. To my knowledge, Sway compiles down to EVM bytecode. So it's like, well, maybe I just learned Sway.
Yeah, no, that is correct. Yeah, maybe when the Sway tutorials, like, overtake the volume of, like, Solidity tutorials, that's
Well,
when
yeah,
we
exactly right. I think
yeah.
just as another brief aside, because I know we're in the middle of a lot of learning here. Um, One thing I often think about when folks are starting fresh, if they want to learn, Web3 skills or front end skills or whatever it is, I'm curious what your thinking is here. Let's say somebody really wanted to learn a front end meta framework, and they basically need to choose between React and Svelte. Like you could say Vue or something like it, but you've got like the really common one with the giant community and all the tutorials, and then you've got the one with the really tight knit community and the great developer experience. People laud it for being just a joy to use. And I'm sort of the school of thought, like if you're trying to learn this to get a foothold in an industry, then you might as well just optimize for the other teams you'd be joining being more likely to have that as part of their stack. But if you're just going to be a solo dev VC, like get some VC funding, go be a startup founder, just you and your buddy, do whatever you want. So I'm curious how you think about it. You've seen a lot more than I have, and how you talk to people that are thinking about whether or not to pick up a language or some tooling.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. It's definitely like where you want to go with this. If your goal is to like get a job somewhere, I would definitely go with like, hey, you should develop the skills necessary for that job, which is gonna be most often the time like developing in Solidity or the most popular stack there, right? And I think especially if you're a beginner, like you really need to leverage that robust community and tutorials and things like that, just for a basis of understanding. Like to the extent of like I'm building it from scratch on my own. Like, sure, use whatever you want. If you want to do something sexy, like try the newest thing, go for it. If you, I think, again with a caveat, if you already have kind of like an understanding um, of the development stack already and like kind of how to explore that, because if you have 0, kind of experience, I would say, don't don't do the I'm not a brave person, is what
You
it
said you
is.
have shiny object syndrome.
I have shiny object syndrome, but, like, I have shiny object syndrome after I've already gotten my foothold into, like,
You get bored.
Solidity
Mhm.
and, like, Web3.js and Ethers and, like, React, right? Like, I wouldn't start off with something completely new.
You like
Um,
learning,
I like
but you
learning,
would
yeah.
recommend starting with a foundation that makes sense.
That's what I would say. But
Okay.
do well. if you wanna become, like, famous, this is, like, your 3rd route, right? So, recommendation for, I guess, like, organic DevRel reach, like, do the sexy thing.
I get it, yeah. Make up a new language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, or, like, contribute to open source and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but, yeah, I think that's kinda where I sit. I think I basically agree with you, I just was more verbose about it and said too many words.
Okay. Speaking of being verbose, let's keep learning a bunch of weird hacks and workarounds and things we'll need to import later. Data structures.
Cool, yeah, so data structures are really annoying, so if you're used to, like, your standard things, life is so easy, right? I love maps, like, if you do a leet code question, everything is a hash table, right? That's the answer. But you might be used to things like, "I can iterate through the keys to get information." That is not the case in Solidity. If you wanna iterate through those, that's like, bleh, right? Um, so again, like I said, hey, you should import Open Zeppelin. They actually have, um, 2 kind of data structures, a neural map and a neural set that kind of they give you the same functionality as maps and sets as you would expect. So if you want to like write dive into the code, but the code is like even more complex than that strings thing that I showed you. But the thing to note is and they note this in their warnings too if you read the documentation specifically for if you're trying to get that list of values, the way they calculate it is they actually store it in memory. They copy over storage to memory. And if you remember what I had said before, new allocation of memory is going to cost more and more. So if you're expecting like a really, really long um, list of stuff that's just going to keep growing and growing, that's actually something you think about of, hey, probably just should not store this on chain in general. Because you are going to run into things like block sizes and gas limits. Um,
Hmm.
and very common, like for apps in production, what they do is actually just build like separate indexers. Um, and that's, I don't have like I never worked as a full out protocol dev, so I can't give you like the best recommendation. I can just tell you like, hey, be careful because you need to think about how you expect your data to grow and change over time and the life cycle of that contract. Um, when you actually are trying to build something like a build a real product, right? So one thing to think about when you're constructing your smart contracts as well is like smart contracts should be mostly focused on, like, performing actions, um, and, like, doing, and changing state. You wanna try and avoid the situations where I'm gonna, like, store 5 billion users in one contract or something like that. Um, so yeah, that's that. The second piece is arrays. So arrays are really weird too. So there's no, like, in version of it. So you basically have to iterate through everything in order to find like check for existence. The flip side is going to be like, hey, you could store in a map and then check the map. And if it's not in the map, the item does not exist. However, you have to be careful about how you check. Because if you look for a non existent item in a map, what Solidity returns are their like null values. And specifically, a null value for a string is an empty string and a null value for an int is 0, and then a null value for address is like address 0. You can find this information online. So it's not a 100% perfect way of doing existence checks, but if there is a way that you don't have to you're not going to encounter that kind of like collision, something to consider. Okay, this next piece is the thing I hate the most. um
Why did they
2D,
do it this way?
right? Okay, so 2D arrays, I don't know
Why?
why, but it's flipped. So essentially, if you're used to
Rude.
like, I always think of it like as rows and then columns, right? So it's usually like row is on the left side, and then columns are defined by the right side. But it's flipped, and so you can see that's what it looks like. Haha. Okay. I have nothing more to say to that. You just, like, sense my
That's a
pain
gotcha. That is a very good
seeping
example of a gotcha.
seeping through. Okay, and the last piece is contract size. So actually, you guys might not encounter this just because, like, from a bigger state, but actually, again, there is a limit on contract size. So you cannot deploy contracts bigger than 24.77 kilobytes. Um, and you're like, for example, I think Lens protocol has all of their contracts online. It's a really complex deployment script, but they actually ran into this problem and had to refactor all of their code
Mm,
so that they wouldn't be reaching these contract size limits.
mm,
So there's a few solutions. One is like the Solidity optimizer. So Solidity provides an optimizer that you would configure in your compiler settings. So this is not a Truffle specific thing. This is just like Solidity compilers. I'm not going to dive into exactly how it works or what it does, but attempts to basically simplify complex code. There's a trade off between how cheap it is to deploy it versus how
mhm,
cheap it is to actually execute it. Because it just kind of defines how you like smash it down into that ABI and bytecode. So that's that. The main point right here, I just wrote like make your error messages smaller. That's chump change. I don't know why I wrote that. The more important thing is splitting your code out into libraries. So libraries aren't actually contracts; those are, I guess, code that you split out. So here's an example. Basically, you can think of it as you would put all of the code that you actually care about in your library, and then just reference it in the actual contract code.
huh,
Um, but this is actually also a few gotchas, right? So if your library function is pure, so that means like you added the pure modifier and so like doesn't read or modify state, that compiler will bring that code into your original contract. So it'll surface up, which does not fix the size problem. So don't do that. So you should default functions to public. Um, and then the next piece is, if you guys, I don't know if they've already learned about like how to call smart contract functions in your front end, but that's going to be stuff like Web3.js and Ethers.js, right? You're passing in the ABIs to these JavaScript libraries to consume. However, if your event is defined in your library and not in your contract, it's not going to be included in that ABI. So your
mm.
external code is not going to know like that event exists. So you actually have to duplicate it. So it's in your library and then you have to duplicate it in your contract. Yes, I also hate these things. But this is where Truffle comes in. Um, so there's I'll show you like the lens deployment with Truffle. It's scary, but one of the things you do is actually you link the library. So like, how do you tell your compiler that this contract actually needs to reference this library? It's a very simple my contract.link interface. So specifically with like these two at the bottom. Um, I won't touch into the main point you should focus on is this top one. It will actually do that event report up, so you don't need to worry about the duplicate copy stuff if you are using Truffle and this method of linking. So yeah. The next piece is I don't know. I Maybe you guys will get into multi-network deployment and testing. It's possible you will or you won't. I think there's probably like bounties for multi-network. So I think there's not a lot of tutorials that cover how to do this. So I'll actually dive into that specifically for how you would do it with Truffle. So before I think we dive into what it looks like, this is where I'm going to transition into like actually starting a Truffle project, and talking about the components of it and what it looks like for a single network deployment. So I'm just gonna open up. Let's go into demos. And this is where I'm talking about Truffle CLI. So this is going to be you cannot split between like you have to choose this instead of hard hat or foundry. Like in this case, I recommend using Truffle as a beginner just because other features that we offer integrate a lot more smoothly right now. And then I'll touch on some other stuff that are really good for starting out. But anyways, so I'm gonna open damn it, I opened okay, Truffle, and I didn't do it. Denver demo. Okay, so this will open it, create it in a different folder. Um, Not this code. And so to first talk about the structure, basically it just goes contracts, migrations. So migrations is going to be the script that you write to define how like you want your contracts to be ordered because they might depend on each other, or need to pass in the different information, and then a test folder for all your tests. Because, haha, if you're a good dev, you should do test driven development. I'm not a great dev. This is why I left full time. So I usually just like to do it off the fly. Um,
Let's go GitHub Copilot. Write me some tests.
yeah, that's my solidity gotcha. If you don't do test-driven development, you're gonna freak out and be like, "Why is everything broken later?" And then
Oh,
you'll come to regret everything, all your bad practices. Anyways, and then
yeah.
the next piece right here is the truffle config. So this is where you're gonna tell it like what networks you're gonna deploy to. So locally for local tests, and then like your actual test net. So that's gonna be Gurley, mainnet, etc., and then your compiler configurations and stuff like that. So that is the base. I'm just gonna write like a super fast contract. Well, maybe it's not gonna be super fast. We only have 9 minutes. I'm not gonna start from scratch. I'm just gonna show you the lens box. Because that is sexy and scary and fun. Um, I don't know where it is.
While you're pulling it up, I think I'm understanding what you're getting at in terms of the refactoring they had to do and showing us how they structured it so they could actually deploy. And it's reminding me of an old story that's a bit antiquated, but it's exactly what I think is happening here based on how you've explained it. And the story is like, um, this family is making a Thanksgiving dinner, and the person cooking has to cut the sides off the ham. They like cut one side off the left of the ham and the right of the ham before they put it in the oven. And their spouse is like, Why are you doing that? Why are you cutting pieces off the ham before you cook it?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know. Let me ask my parent." And they ask their parent, like, "Hey, why did we do that way? You always did it that way growing up. You cut the sides off the ham." And they were like, "Oh, I don't know. Actually, that was just how your grandma always did it. Let's ask grandma." And then grandma's sitting in the corner, and they're like, "Grandma, why do we always cut the sides off the ham before we put it in the oven?" And grandma's like, "Oh yeah, growing up we had a really small oven and it didn't fit, so we had to cut off the sides." But like cut to modern day, we have bigger ovens. That's no longer necessary. So in the same way, like ETH mainnet is the small oven. It did not need to be the case that there was a 24.77 kilobyte limit on the contracts, but that's where we are, and it has the moat, and everything is being warped around that reality. And so you're going to end up in situations like this where we're refactoring our contracts just so we can get them out the door. But if you don't understand all that context, then you would just look at it as a novice and be like, I guess this is a best practice. I'll also split my code into a bunch of different things, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
still the case. We do still cook with the small oven, but
So
I
if
just
you
think it's interesting.
see,
Like some things are good ideas, and then some things are just workarounds.
they have like all of their libraries here. And the main thing was like the lens
Interesting.
hub is like,
Okay.
this is a monster.
This is a
You see it?
monster.
I'm still scrolling.
I'm
Um,
still scrolling.
And then if you look at the migration script, it's also like really scary. But to point out specifically like how you would deploy, like in the simplest form, basically this will get the contracts abstraction. So this is how you tell Truffle like what kind of contract you're working with. Um, and then the syntax is pretty simple. It's just await deployer.deploy, and then you'll pass in your contract. And then as you go through, that will be like, what do you call it? Parameters that you pass into the constructor if your contract has one. And so this is like a really complex example, so don't be scared. But I mean, the documentation is there. But as you
It
can see
seems
right
quite
here,
commented, I will say.
yeah, yeah. So it's not bad. This is on our website if you want to play like look around at it. But yeah, Lens Hub, and they just like link the libraries here. They did it in the not recommended way, which was like through a bunch of addresses instead of the contract abstraction. I don't know why, but I'm suspecting it probably has to do with just like this is fat code. Um, and like if you turn off the optimizer here, it will actually not run because it'll be like it's too big. So make sure that's on. Yeah, so that's like a single deployment. It just basically looks like a truffle migrate, and then you start a network. I don't actually have a network set up yet. So there's a few ways of doing it actually. And so this is kind of where I'm going to dive into features that you can use with other frameworks. So
Mhm.
specifically Truffle Ganache. So Ganache is our local test chain. So you might think of the similarity is going to be like hard hat node. It's relatively the same, but Ganache has, like, extra features that are more, I guess, advanced for like, again, like, this is where I'm going with, like, the motorcycle example, for protocol devs. Um, so, and not uncommon practice that I've seen is actually people will build with hard hat and then just test against Ganache. Because Ganache has, like, a bunch of different things. Let me open up I think I have sample code for um, marketplace. Is this push protocol? Um, yeah. So you might need this. So for example, one way you can do use Ganache for is like forking. So that's going to be bringing that contract, like deployed contracts locally. The code I'm looking at right here specifically is if you guys are not familiar with push protocol, it essentially does decentralized notifications. So it sends people notifications based on chain data, which is pretty cool. But in order to do that, you have to interact with the contracts that they've written. So if you just start up like a vanilla test instance, so hard hat node or Ganache, this is just starting from block zero, right? You're not going to have that information. So how do you actually interact with this? Is you're going to do a Ganache fork, and then you can do girly or Sepolia. In this case, we could do, I think these are actually the girly contracts. Uh, so essentially, all this does is it brings it locally, and it's defaults to 8545. And essentially, the way when you write the test, so I'll show you what the test looks like, um, is it actually interacts with oh, you don't see it here, but you can imagine basically this is a JavaScript test. It will call into this marketplace function when I'm testing unlist NFT. And because it's interacting with this forked instance of Ganache, it will actually be able to find this address and then interact with the push address. If you don't have this, you'll actually have to interact directly with Girly. Um, so that requires real test ETH from faucets. So it's like still fake money, but I think we had like a girly drought at one point, and it was like people were thirsting. I was thirsting. Yeah, and I mentioned it at like every workshop I ever gave, and someone actually like sent me girly ETH, and I was like, ah, yes, this is why I tell people I'm in pain.
Closed
Like,
mouths
if
don't get fed.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so I guess things I want to demo. Okay, we only have 2 minutes, so I'm just gonna go through screenshots at this point. I didn't get to forking, doing multiple networks. That's fine. Tips and tricks. So this will be useful, kind of like why would you start with Truffle? So we offer this thing called Truffle boxes, which is basically scaffold code that gets you started up as fast as possible. So, I'm not gonna show you exactly how you do it, but I think, where is this code? Optimism. Right. So specifically here, if you're gonna be building a smart contract that is uh, using two different, or you have contracts both in you want a mainnet and contracts you want on optimism, you're gonna have to tell Truffle where to look. So in this case, right, it's gonna be the build directory is like, oh, okay, all those ABIs will go there. I'm sourcing the contracts from here. And then these are the networks I care about. This one is specifically for optimism, and then you'll like specify dash dash optimism. And so this is like one example of scaffold code just getting you set up with like, oh, how do I even do like a multi-network project? We have
Hmm.
other ones like that lens box that I showed you basically allows you to deploy all the lens contracts locally, so you can build with them. Lens is interesting. If you guys don't know, Lens is like a decentralized social protocol that allows you to kind of like modify their contracts actually to customize like follow like functionality. And that's why you would actually need all those contracts locally. There's Lensbox. I think the thing that's probably the most useful is going to be there's a Truffle React box that has like kind of a bare bones full stack DApp of what does it look like to connect a simple contract to a React front end, have that wallet connection, everything. So that's kind of how you would start off with a Truffle.
With ethers or something else?
It's with
Oh,
Web3.js,
okay.
but, like, Web3.js and Ethers are pretty much
Yeah, right.
interchangeable. Um, I've actually heard of devs who've also used both. There's, like, certain things that make one feel
Hmm.
better over the other.
Okay.
That's a pretty uncommon practice, but like I said, Web3.js also had, like, a pretty fractured history, but I'm excited for the project. They got picked up by ChainSafe, and have, like, a dedicated team, and I think they came out with, like, V4, recently.
Oh.
So there is focus on, like, revitalizing the project and, like, making it nice. So it's not I think, like, it's kind of in the same place as Truffle, where everyone's like, "Oh, it was the first one," so they remember the pain that was associated with it. But now, like, time has passed, things have changed,
Hmm.
things are coming out. This is not as interesting. Okay, so things like I mentioned console log not existing before with Truffle, it now exists in two forms. So there's you can import it using Ganache like this. All the docs are online. Ganache console log will actually work with Hardhat's print as well, our own Truffle console log. And if you're actually writing in Viper, Viper print will work with Ganache's um, chain. So you would bring up your own Ganache instance, log it however you want, and it should show up right here. The flip side to this is if you want to do it actually Truffle native, you would do this. So this is for if you wanted to show up in like your Truffle console when you're writing tests and stuff. You import truffle console.sol. This is nice because Truffle has extra configs where you can use it to customize the way your logs appear. So specifically, this is one example, right? Like you can add a display prefix, and it'll have all the logs that you cared about and like define it here. This one is like a pretty one my coworker did, which is like a colon. I usually do something like this sucks, and then like I can definitely find my logs very easy. Like
Got
I
it.
hate what is this value, you know, like classic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then we
and
forget to take them out before we push to main.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Cool. So this one's pretty interesting. Um, so this is what I mean with like a better experience with Truffle while we're working towards a hard hat thing. So if you download the Truffle VS Code extension and have are using a Truffle project, you can actually debug statements natively in the code. So you'll
Like,
be if you're
without
used to
even having Ganache running.
with having Ganache running. So
Oh,
Ganache should
okay,
be
so, like,
running.
as you go through it, got it.
Right, right.
So
So, but
step by step.
this is step by step. You can do this with external contracts as well. Like if you're pulling from Etherscan or Sourceify, like if you want to run through like a Uniswap contract or something, it will take some time because it just takes time. And it does have to recompile. So if you're trying to like debug those lens contracts, grab a coffee. Um, but once it compiles, it should be fine. You can also interrupt tests. So if you want to add a debug statement, it'll trigger. This UI right here is the debug CLI. So you can just step through and do everything
Oh,
according to those commands.
cool.
This is going to be what is compatible with Hardhat. So if you're doing a Hardhat config, um, you'll be able to do the whole analysis thing. So yeah, if you see right here, like this is the view, you can see what's going on. Stuff like that. So that's really cool. As for this is like what we have, this is gonna get actually really robust. So Truffle Migrate Network Dashboard. I wonder if I can do this with here. So Truffle Dashboard. is essentially a UI that allows you to deploy your contracts with your MetaMask wallet and sign transactions and do all of that. So if you're used to something like, I should probably, I'm a Truffle dev advocate. I'll let them monitor. Um, yeah. You can deploy with your MetaMask wallet. So if I just do a Truffle migrate work dashboard, you'll never have to expose your private keys. Where's my thing? Yep. So you can see here, if I was doing signing a transaction, this would actually be decoded into like the meaningful values. But this is just the deployment, so it's just telling you all that information. So you can imagine kind of for a more like as we develop dashboard, this kind of visual flow will get more robust and give you a lot more insight into actually like what's going on. So I'm also giving another talk at ETH Denver at the Interop Summit. Um, if you, it's like I think it's the 28th at 12 p.m. It's called like WTF is my smart contract doing? Um, but it's basically covering the different things to figure out like transactions because transactions are really opaque. Transaction receipts don't make any sense. Uh, yeah, like what the freaking heck. Anyway, so this is really useful, I think, for beginners. Dashboard is usable with Hardhat. It is not usable with Foundry yet.
Hmm.
Um, Basically anything that runs on local host. So this runs on localhost 24012. You can use with Hardhat because it's just another network that you'll point to. But yeah, so forking, I already mentioned this. You can do things like unlocking wallets. So if you want to pretend like you're spoof a wallet locally, you can do that too. This is cool. Maybe not as relevant for you guys, but Ganache. The way Ganache stores information versus Hardhat Node allows us to actually create Ganache workspaces. So basically, something you might run into is every time you exit out of that like node terminal, you lose everything. You lose all that transaction history when you start. You start from scratch. Ganache basically allows us to use database paths to store that information. So every time you bring it back up, you'll have your whole transaction history, your deployment history, everything that was going on. So if that's a feature you want to use, go for it. It's usable. I think that's a big reason why more like I guess non-beginner devs would use Ganache over Hardhat.
Sure, I
Uh,
think it's reminding me of like video games and speed runs and save states and being able to like let's say you were trying to really dig into potential exploits like back before we had safe math. It was like underflow errors or overflow errors. Like okay, you could just like do everything you need to do right before you trigger the error and just load that up rather than like I mean, you're talking to me and other folks that are just barely at the level of like I've used Remix once, and when I want to test my thing, I have to like trash can, redeploy, and then go through the GUI to get the state the way I want it, and then I can test the thing I just rewrote. So
yeah.
all of this is like you're just serving up gold on a platter.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm glad. And then the last piece here, this is actually really cool. You can run Ganache in the background. So, like I had mentioned, if you're using like Hardhat Node or whatever, once you exit out of the terminal, it's like goodbye. I mean, it's the same thing with Ganache, right? But you can actually, this is relatively easy, right? So normally it'd be like Ganache, and then you bring it up. Oh, I already have something up. Um, or 9545, right? And then I have all my if I cancel that
Hmm.
out, oh no, blah blah blah. So if I did
Goodbye.
it like
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
it runs in the
Detach.
background. So I
Uh-huh.
can actually exit out of that, bring it back up, and then and that information, and it's still there.
Oh,
It's really nifty difty. And this is kind of where I was going with like L2 tooling with regards to Truffle, and kind of what we're seeing towards the future. Especially like Ethereum scaling, and again, I think solutions that people don't really think about until they're later in their life cycle, is like imagine we modify this so that we can change the name, and now we can create a local environment for a Optimism Ganache and a Filecoin Ganache and an Ethereum Ganache. And then all of that is running in your background. You've essentially created a multi-chain local test environment, which is really cool. Um, if you haven't experienced it so far, it's either like the L2s provide Docker images that you have to bring up, um, or you just like transact on Girly, which is slow and painful.
Mhm.
So yeah, um, it's not fully robust yet, but again, like something that we're working on, something that we're really thinking about. And yeah, that's everything I have. I went 10 minutes over time, sorry, but if you want to get in contact with me, that's like my information. I basically you can all the things that I was angry about in Solidity was because I did this like live stream series called Web3 Unleashed, if you heard of it, where I just like built a DApp with protocol people like every week, and cried every week because I was trying to build a DApp in like 5 days because I don't work on the weekends. um, but
Wow.
yeah, you can find that information on the website. I built like a full NFT rental marketplace, did like smart contract security and other things. But yeah, that's that information. Um, cool. Thanks for sitting around with me.
You're a hurricane.
Okay. Yeah, I hope people learn things.
Oh, yeah. I
Um,
mean, this is
yeah.
definitely the kind of thing where I mean, and tell me if this has been your experience. Like, the goal of learning is not to memorize it completely the first time you hear it. It's to be vaguely aware something like it exists so that, as you kept saying, after you come to ETH Denver, for example, you participate in the Build-a-thon, you got your project. Oh, let's keep working on it. You skipped writing all your tests. You skipped your deployment scripts. You skipped thinking about multi-chain. You skipped thinking about how the data structures grow as the life cycle continues because you're lucky enough to have a life cycle at all. Okay, I need to go back and listen to things like this now, right? And so there's an appropriate time for each thing, but the goal for us and what I really appreciate about you bringing this is like you don't need to memorize it, but it's nice to know that there are resources out there that you could go look up later because I mean, being in this space, being in the tech space, software engineering, whatever you want to call it, you're always learning. Your brain's always going to have that, like, oh, I need to learn a new thing. But like, that's clearly one of your favorite feelings in life is like, okay, how does this work? And how does it solve my problem? And like going from I don't understand it to I don't understand it and seeing it solve a problem, being like, sick. That's what we're going for here. So I really appreciate how many like iterative loops you've been through between like Unleashed and other resources that you're putting together. Like you're still in a lot of wisdom here. Truly, I'm not just trying to blow smoke. Like I really do appreciate the way you condensed like some of the slides you skipped were like hours and hours of debugging pain. So folks can just rewatch this and just like try to get those frames and like read all the text just to like distill
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wisdom.
No. Yeah, I mean, so feel free to DM me, or I can pass these slides along too in the chat. Actually, I'll just make them public.
Sure.
Um, okay, done. Oh, whoops. And copy the link. And I don't actually. Oh, I don't know how to add it
There's a little
to.
private chat here.
Okay, I'll just add it here.
Thank you. For folks that are curious about those slides, I'm going to go ahead and put it in chat. Oh. Thank you so much, Emily. I know you have a hot date, so I won't keep you too much longer.
No, I actually postponed the date till tomorrow. So, yeah. You guys are my Valentines. I promise
Oh,
you.
everyone.
Smart contract,
Yeah,
yeah.
parasocial
Torch
relationships.
down.
Um,
Parasol, oh my god. This is a new buzzword. Oh my goodness.
Sorry. What? No, no, no.
Ah,
Okay.
no,
And
I love it.
everyone
I love
watching
it.
this, I love you specifically. You are
Yeah.
my best friend. Stick around. No, I truly. Um, there are at least like 3 or 4 people watching that I do love deeply from the bottom of my heart. And then for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, if you see Emily or myself at ETH Denver, we're going to be there for most of it, if not, all of it running around. Come say hi. I would truly love to get to know you, what you're working on, what your goals and hopes and dreams are, and how we might be able to support. Because Emily and I have the fantastic position in life of the main thing we try to do is help other people do their things. We get to support Biddlers. So it's a sweet position to be in. Help me, help you. I get a lot out of it. You get to have your dreams come true. And then I won't even ramble about how we're financially incentivized to do it anyway because of how SporkDAO is structured. SporkDAO is cool. It's a co-op owned by the people that come to the event. And then if our venture
Yeah.
arm, if any of the projects that we fund do well, all the community benefits. It's a wild thing. So
No, it is really cool. I think I was on a Twitter space with somebody from Sporkdad, I don't remember, but yeah, the focus was like, how do we take hackathon projects to like not let them die? Because there's so much innovation.
yes,
And
yeah.
yeah, so
Oh,
cool.
OXYA gave us a
I
rose.
oh
Thanks.
I've never received flowers for Valentine's Day. I've been in like 2 relationships, so this is the first.
And
Oh,
that's the
no.
alpha. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming, Emily. This has been a joy and a treat and a blast. And I look forward to
Yeah.
seeing all the fun talks you give at Denver.
Okay, cool. See ya.
Bye.